Hello, Player One. Welcome to the Gaming History Club. My name is Gabby.
Hello, and I'm JP. The writer Thomas Mann once said everything is politics, and he wasn't wrong. Politics weaves into every part of life: art, literature, culture, and yes, even video games. Games don't exist in their own little bubble. They are shaped by the societies, economies, and worldviews that make them, which means that they reflect values, ideas, and ideologies, whether they mean to or not.
So, today we're going to dive into the political history of video games.
Well, this is a big one. Politics in video games. Where do we even start?
What about if we start with the man you mentioned before, which is Thomas Mann?
The man.
Thomas Mann?
He
The
is the
man?
man.
The novelist who once said everything is politics. So he meant that art, literature, culture, they all carry political weight whether they want to or not, right?
Yeah, and video games are no different, right? So they might not always wave a flag and shout around, like games like Papers, Please, right? Where you're literally like a border police officer, like stamping passports and stuff. It's also the quieter stuff that's political. Things like who gets to be a hero, what values get rewarded inside of the game, how's violence, gender, race, how's all of this stuff shown on the screen? How is it interpreted by the player? All of these things reflect the culture behind the game, which is really funny, by the way, because everyone's always like, I don't want politics in my video games.
Yeah, because they don't even realize, right? If everything is politics, then games can't escape it either. Even trying to be apolitical is itself a political stance.
That's right, making no decision is also a decision.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, we ask the question, where do we even start with politics in video games? There are just so many angles. You've got politics as a theme inside games, like the anti war messages in Metal Gear Solid, for example, or the protest and resistance vibes of Mirror's Edge.
Yeah, we've got all of that, but then there's also the obvious propaganda in games sometimes, where they literally push a message onto the player, and things like censorship and where certain titles get banned because they don't fit quite into a country's narrative, right? And don't forget the politics of the players themselves. Look at EVE Online with its player run corporations, real money funded economies. That stuff is basically like space capitalism.
Yes, and all the more subtler stuff like design choice that reveal a developer's worldview, like what you mentioned before, like who's the hero, what's rewarded and what's ignored,
Right.
actually, as an undertone. So, yeah, anyway, shall we get into it then?
Let's start in 1980 with Missile Command, a perfect arcade game, I think, to set the tone for this episode.
Yes, so this one was released at the height of the Cold War, so it put the fear of nuclear annihilation right in the player's hand. So you defend six cities from incoming ICBMs, and what's chilling about this game is that you never actually see your real enemy. No nation, no faces, just endless missiles raining down. And the game always ends in defeat, right? So you can't actually win. It's a parable of mutual assured destruction, means you just can't win a nuclear war.
We are all losers when it comes to nuclear war. That's right.
Exactly, and I agree with that.
Yeah, so the designer Dave Führer, could you say his name, please? Because I'm worried that with my German accent, his last name might get confused.
Do you think I can actually say his last name?
Designer Dave Führer.
Führer. I think it is
Yeah.
Führer, not Führer.
Let's just call him the Führer. Let's just stick to it, okay? So even he admitted in an interview that he had reoccurring nightmares for like many years about nuclear attacks, right? And those fears, well, they bled straight into the game as well. Especially instead of the cheery game over screen that you're used to from other video games, especially in the arcade, this game ends by, well, all of your six cities are lost, right? Which is something you cannot avoid. And then at the end, you see the end, which is a much more chilling way to end that game then as well, I feel like. Another cool detail that I would like to applaud is that they never named the aggressor though. So, which I think is twofold why it's so cool. Number one, you're not saying like, oh, it would be easy to say it's the Russians or whatever, the middle of the Cold War. But it also makes the arcade game much more timeless and kind of scary as well. You do not see your enemy. You're just trying to defend your city from these ICBMs coming in.
Yeah, and by the way, speaking of Russia, that kind of brings us to our next game, Tetris. So, unlike Missile Command, this one didn't come from America and it was born behind the Iron Curtain instead. Alexei Pachitnov created it as a Soviet Academy of Sciences on a state owned computer. And since it was during the communist USSR, individuals couldn't particularly own games, so Alexei didn't earn royalties for years. The rights technically belonged to the state.
Meanwhile, in the West, it triggered a real capitalist feeding frenzy, though. So everyone like Nintendo, Atari, Microsoft, they were all fighting for distribution rights of the game Tetris. And often the contracts overlapped over each other. There was a lot of infighting, lawsuits piled up, and it turned into a licensing Cold War, if you like. But with all those challenges, Tetris still managed to break through, and it was really the first Soviet game that really managed to capture the West. On the surface, it was just a puzzle game, but underneath, you can think of it as a real cultural export, with quite a bit of symbolic weight to it as well, breaking through the Iron Curtain.
Yeah, it was soft power in a Game Boy cartridge. It didn't contain propaganda. It didn't contain any military might. It's just blocks falling, hypnotizing everyone from kids to office workers. So that's the true power of Tetris.
And definitely one of my favorite facts I've learned during Gaming History Club is that in 1993, the Russian cosmonaut Alexander Serebrov even played it on a Game Boy in space. So that's probably like the most Cold War sentence ever, right? But definitely my favorite trivia ever. Tetris was the first game played in outer space.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. But yeah, while Tetris might look apolitical, it became a proxy war in miniature, right? I mean, on one side, it is a state-owned Soviet creation, but on the other, it's a capitalist commodity at the same time. And speaking of systems and ideologies, the late 80s and 90s brought us a wave of simulation games like SimCity, Civilization, and more. Games that didn't just entertain, but let players play around with politics, society, and play around with power itself.
Well, let's leave the Cold War missiles and falling blocks behind us then and have a look at the 80s and early 90s with SimCity and Civilization. So they were both released just a couple of years apart, SimCity in 1989 and Civilization in 1991. But the reason we want to talk about these is because they show how games that might look politically neutral are actually full of ideology.
Yeah, take SimCity, right? Its designer Will Wright wanted to create a game about simulating systems of a city instead of telling stories. But the thing is, systems aren't neutral. Systems carry assumptions. For example, in SimCity, growth is always treated as good. Your city must expand endlessly or you failed. But actually, if you see it in real life, can infinite growth on a finite planet even be possible? Or only in our capitalist wet dreams is that possible?
Was that a rhetorical question? Because I do believe it's only in our capitalist wet dreams.
Of course, it was rhetorical.
Ah, okay.
So, yes.
Very well put, Gabby. I think similarly, how the game deals with crime is also kind of questionable. The way that the game solves crime is simply by building more police stations and having more cops in your city. But is there something deeper that we could have explored here? What about the root cause of crime rates? Isn't it overly simple to just think about it as cops is, beating crime and crime is always bad and they're just mean people that deserve to be thrown behind bars? There could have been more social criticism here at play. And taxes are another example of this. So in the game, taxes are always linked to the prosperity and the happiness levels of the Sim City. But that's a very American economic lens to look at that. It implies that by lowering taxes, you're always automatically becoming more successful, and it automatically also makes everybody happy. And there's absolutely no middle ground in this.
Yeah, and even the way urban planning philosophies get gamified, right, means you're quietly absorbing a worldview about how cities should function in this game. Obviously, we don't want to criticize SimCity all well right here. It is a good game. It's a great game, actually. The point we want to make is that even when games appear to be neutral, they might not be because rules themselves contain ideology.
Yes, and I think by looking at the next game, Civilization, it brings our point home even more so. So, in Sid Meier's Empire Builder, you guide the people from 4000 BC all the way to the space age. But we are given a very particular type of history here as well. It's mainly centered around the idea that technology is the main and almost only driver of progress for a civilization. So think of it as you go from the Stone Age, then into the Bronze Age, and then into the Space Age, as if history is just a straight line moving forward and there's no collaboration between all the different civilizations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to be honest with you, if you're seeing civilization adapted to like the Asian world, for example, it will look very different. And civilization is very focusing on a Western way of seeing it, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's much more complicated. Like, gunpowder comes to us from Asia. Like, we don't all just invented gunpowder by ourselves just because, progress. It doesn't just magically happen like that, does it?
Yeah, and in the game, the way you win, quote unquote win, in a way, reinforces that. Colonization and conquest aren't questioned, they're rewarded. Expansion means better and more advanced empire, which is, you know, there are so many levels to it. You can't just say invade other places and that's making you better. No, not as simple as that.
We can even see this inside of the tech trees of the game. They represent a very Eurocentric vision of advancement, where some cultures' achievements, they're just invisible, while ours, of course, are elevated as the default path, like we were always destined this way.
Yeah, you could even argue it's a little Darwinian, isn't it? Like progress through competition, domination, that idea of survival of the fittest, basically.
I mean, I'm no expert, but it feels a little bit more like this should be for evolution and not civilization and
Yes.
sociology, maybe. But if SimCity taught us anything, then it's how a city should be functioning, but then civilization, it takes it even further. Now it's telling us, well, whose history truly matters here and how history itself should function.
Okay, so I think we can take it to a more lighter and fun note now. Let's briefly skip ahead 10 years just to round up strategy games before coming back to the 90s. We can't really talk about politics in video games without mentioning a series that literally simulates politics, Tropico. So, at its heart, Tropico is a city building and management sim, but with a twist of sharp political satire.
In Tropico, you take on the role of El Presidente, the ruler of a small island banana republic, and from there it's all about balancing, or maybe not balancing, politics. So you oversee the infrastructure, you manage its economy, of course, you make policies, you juggle relationships with the foreign powers, and somehow all while trying to keep your citizens from rising up against you.
And what makes Tropico stand out is that it's not just about building a city, it's about social engineering. So if you want to play as a beloved democratic leader, go for it. But if you prefer the life of a corrupt dictator, getting richer whilst your people suffer, that's totally on the table as well.
The cool thing here for me is the unhinged quotes in Tropico, though. Like, remember, a vote for El Presidente is a vote for me.
Yeah, clearly, right? You're the one who's playing.
Or, in Tropico, even the palm trees have political opinions.
Yeah, the series reflects real world politics through parody. You're not only balancing housing, healthcare, jobs, you're also deciding how much you'll bend to superpowers like the US, the USSR, or later in the game, EU and China. So every road you build or election you rig becomes part of this larger satire about how leaders cling to power. I guess, in a way, Tropico is the only game where you can spend half an hour building a beautiful beach resort, right? Then immediately declare martial law. And somehow it is done in a fun way, unlike basically every other game we'll be talking about in this episode.
Yeah, most games we'll be looking at aren't perhaps satirical or parodies. So now that we've rounded up the strategy games, let's go back to the 90s again. So this was the decade when games stopped being ignored for their content and actually started getting regulated now. So graphics were getting sharper, even if they were just pixel graphics still for the most of it. FMV was showing up, so video cutscenes in games. And with that, obviously, came the ability now to portray gore, violence, and adult themes as well.
Yeah, cue the controversy, right? Doom, Night Trap, Mortal Kombat. These games sparked US Senate hearings on video game violence, and the result was the ESRB rating system in America and similar rating boards elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add a little bit of side trivia here, since we're in the 90s. So in Germany, Wolfenstein 3D was actually banned because it has to comply with the laws prohibiting Nazi symbols, right? Because in Germany, you definitely aren't allowed to still draw swastikas on buildings and such, right? So in other games of the series, the games were altered though so they could still be released in Germany. So, for example, Hitler's mustache was removed, and now all of a sudden he doesn't look like Hitler anymore. Okay. And swastikas were replaced with a triangular sigil, and generally references to Nazis were completely altered to avoid violating the German criminal code, so we could still play the games without all the Nazi references.
In general, though, the 90s weren't as much about politics inside games, but politics around video games, like morality, corruption of children, protecting the youth. So it was less about the gameplay, more about public panic. And since we've already covered that in depth in our fatality violence in video games episode, we won't linger here too much. Instead, let's fast forward into the new millennium, where politics didn't just regulate games, they stepped inside video games.
Look no further than America's Army from 2002, a game that was developed by the US military itself. Propaganda you could actually play. So, how did this happen? Well, one day the US Army decides, why spend millions on TV ads when we can just create a video game? And so they launched America's Army on Independence Day 2002. Happy birthday to me, by the way.
Oh, yeah, it's more important, isn't it?
Well, I became 11 on this day, so hey ho. Built in the Unreal Engine by a team at the Naval Postgraduate School, it was bankrolled by Uncle Sam himself, and it was free to download, it was free to play, but very much not free of politics.
Who's this Uncle Sam, by the way? I also want to be bankrolled by this uncle. Very nice uncle.
I
Yeah.
believe it just means the US military. I don't know why they characterize it like that sometimes. We are obviously pacifists, so we are only mildly
are.
curious about what's happening here.
I know. But anyway, let's get back to the video game. So, to even get into action in the game, you had to pass this bootcamp style training.
I remember this so well. It was so annoying. I downloaded this game. I played it for myself back in the day, and all you want to do is like, it was free to play, and you're like, maybe this can be my Counter-Strike whilst I'm too poor to actually afford Counter-Strike, right? And then you're like, first I have to do like this sneaking mission for like 2 hours, and
Yeah.
like this trading, like this forced stealth section. Believe me, none of this game was actually about stealth in the end. It was very frustrating, let me tell you.
Was it more shooty than you?
It was definitely more shooty once you actually get over the stupid training you had to do. I guess this was their way of saying, like, listen, before you get to go into other countries and spread freedom, you first have to go to boot camp. Maybe that's their way of letting you know in the game.
Okay, so back to the game. I believe you earn honor points based on the army's values, so you followed real rules of engagement. And I think the funny thing is that every team saw itself as the US Army fighting a faceless enemy while you're fighting other team who also think they're the US Army. fighting a faceless enemy, which is your team.
That's right, yeah. In
Yeah,
Counter-Strike terms, this would be like you play as the counter-terrorists, and the other team are the terrorists. But that other team, the terrorists, they also see themselves as counter-terrorists, and they actually see you as the terrorists. Quite interesting and clever propaganda, if I might add.
yeah, I know. I mean, speaking of propaganda, though, I mean, it's linking straight from the launcher to goarmy.com. So this was the world's most immersive recruiting ad, I would say.
And it was a very successful recruiting ad as well. So within the first year, there was already millions of players, and there were tens of millions of hours logged playing this game. And all while there was no cost to the army itself, other than having to develop the game in the first place. The rest was just server cost, of course. There was even a study stating that nearly 30% of young Americans felt more positive about the army after they played the game, which is more impact than all the billboards and commercials combined.
And it's all due to the timing as well. While the game was conceived back in 1999, but it was released months after 9/11, right as the war on terror ramped up. It was just perfect timing for maximum effect.
But don't take it from us, critics also really hammered this game for sanitizing war. There's no gore, there's no civilians, there's no trauma, there is no grim reality of warfare. It's just clean headshots, teamwork, and fist bumps. Yeah, bro, USA, USA.
Yeah, that's the real political punchline. America's army didn't stop at speeches and flag waving. It made being in the army look like a cool esport, and the game was basically a brochure to join the US Army.
Whew, okay, so we got a little bit serious here again. Let's add a little bit of side trivia just to calm down and breathe a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is only kind of loosely related to politics in games, but it still fits. And since we talked about 9/11, it might also be cool to mention that Grand Theft Auto 3 came out in October 2001, which is just 1 month after 9/11, right? The game's Liberty City is inspired by New York, and Rockstar made a few changes to avoid hitting any raw nerves.
Yes, for the cover art, they removed an explosion, and for the police cars in game, their color scheme was tweaked so they wouldn't resemble the NYPD. And also, a mission arc involving terrorism got cut, along with some radio dialogue and pedestrian chatter.
A lot of people think the Twin Towers were removed from the game, but apparently they were never in the game to begin with anyway. Liberty City isn't just New York, it's supposed to be a blend of American cities, but of course it is largely inspired by New York. And people also talk about the Dodo plane, so there's a rumor that you couldn't fully fly the Dodo plane, just hover in it for like a few seconds. But it's actually not true as well. It had nothing to do with 9/11. It was just a really bad plane for laughs, I suppose.
So, yes, what we're saying is even though GTA 3 was developed well before 9/11, Rockstar carefully adjusted content to be sensitive to the world around it, making some very last minute changes.
Yeah, I thought this was a cool piece of trivia to add in here because GTA is very well known for its satire, its social commentary, and very often quite gritty humor, but also they very clearly know how to tread that fine balance between tasteful and untasteful.
Okay, we're entering a little bit of a controversial zone here. Let's talk about the big war game franchises of the 2000s: Medal of Honor, Call of Duty, and Battlefield.
Yes, so sure, they all brought their own unique thing to the FPS genre, but when you take a step back, they share a lot of the same political DNA that we would like to discuss in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, the early World War II entries usually cast Western forces, especially the American and British, as the unquestioned heroes here, and the safest enemy of all time.
Nazis.
Yep, always handy when you want zero moral ambiguity, I guess.
Meanwhile, civilian casualties, collateral damage, they're all basically abstracted away. Cities are battlegrounds, but innocent lives, yeah, they don't enter the picture.
And of course, it's political because after 9/11, the enemies shifted. suddenly the default bad guys were Middle Eastern insurgents or Russians or vaguely Asian foes who are shadowy, interchangeable, and lawless.
Some missions borrowed from real conflicts, but usually by simplifying or distorting the history somewhat, enough to feel quote unquote authentic, but not enough to challenge the player about the moral dilemma of the situation he's in.
And speaking of authenticity, right? Developers often worked with the military for technical details like uniforms, weapons, and vehicles. But that also meant aligning the games with state's narrative because you have to take it from a country, right? From the real uniform or weapons or vehicles. So, yeah.
Yeah, which is something they do with movies as well, by the way. It's not just video games.
Yep.
It's the quote unquote military entertainment complex, they call it. And this is what's at the heart of it. These games frame the West as the default moral anchor. War is always shown as something that is necessary. It is always just when we, quote unquote, are in the war, and it's winnable only if you have enough grit and firepower. Or let's just say it in a different way. Modern conflicts are sugar coated into very simple good guy versus bad guy.
We use a lot of quote unquote in this episode.
Well, yes, that is true.
That is true. We're treating it carefully ish.
Perhaps we should shorten it to just quote quote.
Quote quote.
Oh, QQ. Not a quick question, but a quote quote.
QQ. Yes. But yeah, it's not just the big war FPS franchises. Let's pull one more example. Otherwise, we'd be here all day because all of them contain the same messages. Anyway, Ubisoft loves to say their games are apolitical. But I mean, come on. Seriously? I mean, do you want to say Assassin's Creed is apolitical?
It's probably the most political game out there.
Yeah. But the moment you scratch the surface, it's either self-delusion, right? Or they're insulting our intelligence, in a way.
Look no further than Far Cry. Well, if Medal of Honor and Call of Duty tell us that Western soldiers can't save the world, Far Cry says, hey, backpacking Western tourists can do it too. It's different clothes, but the same politics. The formula is always the same. You get parachuted into some exotic location, and locals are either helpless victims or dangerous savages. And you, as the outsider, you're usually white, you're usually Western, and you become the heroic savior that needs to help these helpless people from themselves.
That's colonial politics dressed up as open world chaos. It reinforces the worldview that Western intervention is natural, necessary, and heroic.
Right. With all that being said, obviously players want to identify with their protagonists, and these games are made in the West. So obviously that is the lens that they will reflect. But let's just turn the tables for a moment. If you're giving Far Cry, an easy time, by saying, it's just the way it is, we just like having a nice island and, seeing some other things than, American cities or whatever. Flip the table, for example, and imagine there's a big blockbuster Chinese game in which a protagonist gets parachuted into New York to spread communist ideals. To you, that would scream propaganda. So why should it feel any different the other way around?
Okay, alright. I'm quite tired talking about the war and shooters.
Oh,
and
tell me about it.
all violence. Because you know what? It's not all negative when we talk about politics in games. Sure, they can reinforce propaganda or gloss over real world horrors, but they can also do the opposite. They can force us to confront complex issues and moral dilemmas in a way movies or books can't do. One of the best examples come from the indie boom of the 2010s. So in 2013, Lucas Pope released Papers, Please. And instead of playing a soldier or a freedom fighter, you play as a border officer in a fictional authoritarian state.
That's right. Your job is simply stamping passports, checking documents, and following the rules. And on paper, it's just a bureaucracy simulator. But here's the thing. Every stamp carries a moral weight to it. For example, Do you follow orders and keep your own family safe? Or do you break the rules to help someone desperately in need and risk everything?
Yeah, it's cool, right? Because the game doesn't hand you a gun, it hands you a rubber stamp and dares you to feel like a monster in a way, still. The chilling part is how fast you catch yourself thinking, well, it's just my job. I'm just doing my job here.
Yeah, this is a video game shedding real psychological insight into how everyone can be turned evil. This is where the game's brilliance actually shines. It shows how systems of control don't usually run on fiery speeches. No, they run on routine, paperwork, and people convincing themselves they're only following orders.
Yeah, it's giving the idea of like anyone under pressure can become complicit in committing harm. But yes, Papers, Please was rightly acclaimed. We're talking multiple awards, glowing reviews. This is one of those moments we can proudly say that video games are an art form. Yeah.
Let's talk about another indie game that turned the idea of war games on its head. This War of Mine, which was released in 2014 by the Polish studio 11-Bit. This time, instead of casting you as just another soldier hero, you actually play as civilians trapped in a city under siege. The game was inspired by the siege of Sarajevo during the Bosnian War, a brutal 4-year ordeal and the longest siege of a capital city in modern warfare.
Yes, the tone of the game couldn't be further from the sugar coated good guys versus bad guys of mainstream FPS games. War here isn't glorious, it's traumatic. Real war is traumatic. And the only way to win, if you can call it that, is to avoid fighting altogether.
Yes, forget about lining up headshots. Your battles are about your hunger, how sick you are, and the scarcity of your supplies. You are constantly forced with these impossible choices like, do I steal from others to keep my own group alive, or do I risk death in order to scavenge for more supplies?
What makes this game so political is exactly what it refuses to glamorize. There are no medals, no cutscenes of heroism, just the harsh choices of survival, and it dares to show war from the perspective of the civilians caught in the middle, which I dare say most games choose to ignore.
That's right, but hey, it turns out if we are actually in war, most of us will be those civilians trying to survive and hide. We are not going to be the soldiers out on the front line, are we?
Yep.
This was another very well received and acclaimed title, but I think the most noteworthy thing about this game is the game was actually introduced to the learning curriculum in Polish high schools just because of how good it is and how much information it conveys to, students about the reality of war.
Okay, let's move on. But since we're in 2014, I think we should at least acknowledge Gamergate, a scandal way too big to unpack in this episode. So, Gamergate was a flashpoint for sexism, culture wars, and internet radicalization. Politics weren't just in the games anymore now, they were in the players, the forums, the whole culture and community.
What started out as a relatively small, false accusation against a game developer, Zoe Quinn, quickly spiraled into a full blown harassment campaign against women in gaming. And I don't just mean female developers, we're talking also critics and journalists.
Representation in games, meaning more women, LGBTQ plus characters, more diverse voices, all suddenly got painted as political agendas. Even questioning who gets to make or be in games was being seen as political.
But Gamergate wasn't just about the games either. It was a very early warning sign of how online communities could be weaponized in general. But we're not going to dive deeper into this today. If you would like to hear more about Gamergate in full, then let us know, Player One. You can find out how to reach us on gaminghistory.club. But for now, Gamergate is too important and way too big to rush into in this episode.
Okay, so we've been through a lot of ground already in this episode, right? So let's pace through a couple more fascinating moments before we wrap up. Here's one I didn't even know about. During the 2020 US presidential campaign, Joe Biden's team actually set up shop in Animal Crossing New Horizons.
Yeah, in this family friendly Nintendo Switch game, the campaign basically bought virtual real estate, an entire island where you could visit the Biden HQ. And players could drop by the field office, help out with text banks and phone banks, and even swing by a polling station to be reminded of how you're supposed to vote in real life.
Yeah, and the island had ice cream stands, model trains, even a wandering Kamala Harris you could take selfies with. So, yeah, they're trying to be trendy here. And players could decorate their own neighborhoods with Biden campaign signs. It shows how far politics had come in gaming. What started as games reflecting politics flipped into politics using games as a campaign tool. So, yeah, it definitely has grown.
Which brings us neatly into another way games mirror our world questions about AI, humanity, and ethics, like in Detroit Become Human. So let's finish with something a little more contemporary. In Detroit Become Human, released in 2018, it puts you, the player, in control of three androids in a near future Detroit. And in this world, humans are actually exploiting AI as workers and servants, much like we do now. My poor GPT, I don't even ask please anymore half of the time. Do you, Gabby?
I do.
Ah, that's
I
cute.
still say please and thank you, and apparently that's not actually advisable because it eats up the power, apparently. So I should probably stop.
I think it just costs them a lot more.
Yep.
Yeah. And through Quantic Dream's interactive storytelling style that they are known for so well in their games, your choices can either reinforce injustice, it can subvert it, or you can spark a full on revolution.
So the mechanics are mostly decision making, and the story will branch depending on what you do or don't do. So even inaction has consequences. If you ignore injustice, you become complicit.
The game does something that truly only video games can do extremely well. You experience the world through the eyes of AI that have no rights. Discrimination, segregation, and systematic oppression, these aren't background details help to make the world more believable. They are totally central to the gameplay.
Yeah, right? Because the game doesn't even ask whether you're good or bad. It asks whether you're willing to see injustice and act upon it. And if you choose not to act, well, that's part of the political power the game wants to highlight. It's a reminder that games can make us confront real moral and political dilemmas of the future in ways few other media can, by putting us, the player, in the front seat faced with the intended and unintended consequences of our chosen actions.
Whew. Well, I think we have been through a lot today, and I can feel myself a little bit angry at all of this propaganda and segregation and choices I have to make.
I know, right? It's definitely invoking a lot of thoughts. But yeah, to be honest, we barely scratched the surface as well, though. There's still stuff like the Minecraft Uncensored Library, for example, and Gamergate, as we mentioned before. We'd really love to delve deeper into those in different episodes.
So, with all that, Player One, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I am willing to bet it was more fun and insightful than you may have thought.
And yes, as usual, new episodes of Gaming History Club are released every other Wednesday, so make sure you subscribe and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Gaming History Club.
Come back in a couple of weeks, Player One, when we visit our special place. After more than a decade, Silent Hill returns. So come back and let us take you through the history of Silent Hill. Have you seen a little girl?